So one of the other major threats to box turtles in New Jersey is illegal collection from the wild. And this has been happening for a long time and now both at small and large scales. It's a big problem for box turtles because typically can't recover from any removal from the wild of any type. Even the loss of 1 or 2 adult animals can be really bad for a box turtle population. Luckily, our Bureau of Law Enforcement has been doing a great job tracking down turtles that have been illegally taken and kind of confiscating them and kind of bringing that back into Fish and Wildlife possession. The project that we're going to be talking about today is a result of wildlife law enforcement's actions of getting animals back into our possession. Before we release animals back into the wild after a law enforcement confiscation, we go through a number of steps to make sure it's an informed decision. So we think about the animal's health, we think about the genetics of the animal, and we want to have a mechanism to monitor the animals post-release, determine whether or not the project was successful or not. So we have these 2 groups of box turtles, 38 from Maurice and Turtle Conservancy and 30 from Woodlands. And our goal was to release all of them as one group to reestablish a population on a piece of protected state land.
Grab a beautiful female here. So she's going to be one of the animals, she's marked. Being the Turtle Conservancy and being well known in the turtle community, we get a lot of phone calls from all kinds of agencies. And then at some point the state or whatever agency, it could be federal Fish and Wildlife or state Fish and Wildlife, they'll then let us know, okay, the court case is settled, the animals, we can release them to your custody. Generally we take them and I take them. And some of these animals that you see right behind me, this enclosure that I built, I've been here for 30 years. I tried to make the best, most naturalistic enclosure I can make for these animals. So they have, everything they have in nature, they can forage on their own. Even with all that, animals die. The stress from the, capture, you don't know what these poachers do. They mix them all up. They have hundreds together. Unfortunately, the pet trade is not going to stop. From day one of meeting Brian, he was on the same page as I. He was like, what can we do? We cannot keep just taking these animals. At some point, the pen's gonna fill up, that pen's gonna fill up. We gotta keep building turtle pens, and that's just not economically feasible. And this is why what's happening right now is so important. What's amazing is this is now a model. This is like you have a turnkey model that you can show other states and say, hey, it worked in New Jersey, it's gonna work in your state. It needs to stop where these animals just go into random places. They need to go into a program with the goal of putting them back in the wild.
Each of those animals at the individual level went through a number of these different steps to determine the outcome for them. So we did multiple rounds of health assessments of them, to detect for different pathogens that might impact themselves once released or other turtles they encounter in the wild. We did genetic analysis on all of the animals to kind of make sure that we were kind of putting them back into a range that was suitable for them based upon the genetic results. And we came up with a monitoring plan to help us understand how well these animals are doing once they're back into the wild.
Woodlands Wildlife Refuge is a 501c3 charity, so being able to support the animals and get them to a point where they can be released is huge, and this was definitely the biggest group of turtles that we've helped with. Unfortunately, a lot of times these seizures result in not a good prognosis for the animal because we don't know where they came from, we don't have their history, and maybe they're not even in good health. When Brian reached out to us and said, hey, we might be able to release this group of turtles, we were so excited to be a part in this bigger mission to help these animals.
So we had a couple different goals for this project. One, we knew we wanted to get these animals a second chance at getting back into the wild. And so there were a number of different things we wanted to track and monitor. One was survivorship. So how well do they do once they're back out into the wild? Do they survive? 2, what impact, if any, do this group of 68 turtles have on any resident turtles that may already be in the area? 3, when you release turtles back into the wild, how do they imprint onto the site? How long does it take them to establish a home range? Are they able to find critical habitats over different periods of time? Critical habitats being, nesting areas, overwintering areas. So to help us accomplish the goals of the project, we decided to radio track every single one of the released turtles. So we purchased wildlife transmitters. We applied 68 of these wildlife transmitters to every single turtle that was set for release. These transmitters have a lifespan of about 800 days, and so we'll be able to monitor each individual turtle from release, August of 2024, all the way through the spring of 2026. That'll allow us to monitor where they overwinter across 2 different winters, and it'll also allow us to see if females find appropriate and suitable nesting areas within the landscape that we're placing them. And then of course it'll also allow us to see at the end of the study period how many of those original turtles have hopefully survived, how they may have integrated or interacted with other wild turtles within the release site, and basically how quickly or not they've established home range within the released area.